The daily battle that decides who controls your life. Every human life is governed by a battle that most people never consciously recognize. It does not take place on visible battlefields, nor does it announce itself with noise or spectacle. Yet it quietly determines the direction of your thoughts, the quality of your decisions, the strength of your discipline, and ultimately the destiny of your soul. This is the daily battle that decides who controls your life. From the moment you wake up until the moment you fall asleep, forces are competing for authority over your inner world. One pulls you toward meaning, restraint, clarity, purpose, and long-term growth. The other seduces you toward comfort, impulse, distraction, gratification, and short-term relief. This battle does not wait for extraordinary moments. It unfolds in ordinary decisions: what you consume, what you tolerate, what you avoid, what you justify, and what you repeat. Over time, these quiet choices form the architecture of your character. Most people believe life is controlled by external circumstances: money, relationships, luck, opportunities, or misfortune. But history, psychology, and spiritual wisdom all point to a deeper truth. Life is controlled from within, not by what happens to you, but by what rules you. The real question is not whether you will face struggles, temptations, or pain. The question is, who will command your response when they appear? This is not a theoretical discussion. It is deeply practical and uncomfortably personal. Every addiction, every repeated mistake, every abandoned dream, and every unfulfilled potential can be traced back to moments when control was surrendered. Not dramatically, but gradually. Not in one catastrophic decision, but in thousands of small compromises made daily. This series is not designed to entertain or soothe. It is designed to awaken awareness, to expose the mechanisms behind inner conflict, to reveal why so many intelligent, capable people feel trapped in cycles they swear they want to escape, yet somehow repeat. And more importantly, to show that freedom is not found in intensity or motivation, but in understanding and alignment. If you have ever felt that part of you knows exactly what you should do, while another part constantly undermines that knowledge, this message is for you. If you have ever promised yourself that tomorrow you would change, only to find yourself doing the same things again, this message is for you. And if you have ever sensed that your life is being quietly directed by forces you do not fully command, then this battle is already underway. The daily battle is not between good people and bad people. It is not between the strong and the weak. It is between awareness and impulse, between purpose and appetite, between what builds you and what drains you. And the side that wins is the side you empower through repetition. Understanding this battle is the first act of reclaiming control. And that understanding begins with recognizing the two opposing forces that shape every human life. The two voices that compete for control. Every day, whether you notice it or not, two voices speak within you. They do not announce their names, and they rarely argue loudly. Instead, they whisper, they suggest, they rationalize. They wait for moments when you are tired, distracted, stressed, or emotionally vulnerable, and whichever voice you listen to most becomes the authority over your life. One voice speaks in terms of long-term truth. It values discipline over comfort, meaning over pleasure, growth over ease. This voice is quiet, patient, and often inconvenient. It does not promise immediate relief. It does not flatter your ego. It does not excuse your weaknesses. Instead, it calls you upward, asking for effort, consistency, and responsibility. This voice understands consequences before they arrive. The other voice speaks in the language of immediacy. It promises comfort now, escape now, pleasure now. It minimizes long-term consequences and magnifies present discomfort. It tells you that you deserve relief, that you can change later, that this moment does not matter. It is persuasive, emotional, and skilled at using your past failures as justification for repeating them. These two voices are not abstract concepts. They manifest in specific moments. When you choose whether to get up early or stay in bed. When you decide whether to confront a difficult truth or distract yourself. When you determine whether to respond with restraint or impulse. When you decide whether to invest effort in what matters or seek relief from what is hard. Most people believe they make these decisions consciously. In reality, most decisions are made automatically, guided by whichever voice has been strengthened through habit. This is why understanding the nature of these voices is critical. Because control is not seized in moments of inspiration, it is built through alignment with the voice you repeatedly obey. The voice of discipline does not shout because it does not need to. It operates through clarity. It understands that pain avoided today becomes pain multiplied tomorrow. It sees beyond emotion and evaluates reality as it is, not as it feels. This voice reminds you that your future self will inherit the results of your present choices, whether you acknowledge that responsibility or not. The voice of impulse, on the other hand, thrives on emotional immediacy. It interprets discomfort as danger and effort as oppression. It reframes self-control as deprivation and indulgence as self-care. It is exceptionally skilled at justifying itself, especially when you are tired or discouraged. It does not say, "I will ruin your life." It says, "Just this once, again and again." The tragedy is that most people do not lose control because they choose destruction. They lose control because they misunderstand these voices. They mistake impulse for authenticity and discipline for repression. They believe that following every desire is freedom, without realizing that unexamined desire becomes a master, not a companion. Over time, the voice you obey becomes stronger. Neural pathways reinforce it. Emotional associations deepen. What once felt difficult becomes automatic. This is why habits feel so powerful and change feels so hard. You are not fighting a single decision. You are confronting an identity built through repetition. The daily battle, then, is not about heroic resistance. It is about recognition. Can you recognize which voice is speaking in a given moment? Can you identify when justification is disguising avoidance? Can you pause long enough to choose alignment over impulse? True control begins with this awareness, not by silencing desire entirely, but by understanding its nature. Desire is not evil. But desire without discipline becomes domination. When impulse rules, life narrows, choices shrink, reactions replace intentions, and slowly, without dramatic collapse, a person becomes governed rather than governing. Those who regain control do not eliminate temptation. They reorganize authority. They decide which voice has the final say. They accept that discomfort is the price of growth, and that comfort, when pursued without restraint, extracts a far greater cost over time. This is why the battle is daily, because authority is renewed every day. Yesterday's discipline does not guarantee today's obedience. Yesterday's awareness does not protect against today's rationalization. Control is not stored, it is practiced. And here is the most important truth. The voice you strengthen today will speak louder tomorrow. Every choice is a vote. Every repetition is a reinforcement. Every moment of awareness is an act of leadership over your inner world. If this message resonates with you, it means you are already hearing the voice that wants more for your life. Do not ignore it. Strengthen it. If you want to continue learning how to win this daily battle and reclaim control over your life, subscribe to the channel now. What comes next will challenge you, but it will also change the way you see yourself, your habits, and your future. Control is not something that disappears overnight. It does not vanish in a single dramatic failure or collapse. It dissolves gradually, almost invisibly, through repetition, neglect, and unconscious surrender. Most people never notice the exact moment they lose control of their lives because it happens while they are busy reacting, coping, and distracting themselves. The erosion of control is subtle, patient, and systematic, and that is precisely why it is so powerful. At the center of this process is automation. The human mind is built to automate behavior. This is one of its greatest strengths and, when mismanaged, one of its greatest dangers. Automation allows us to perform complex tasks without expending excessive energy. It frees cognitive resources. But when automation takes over areas of life that require intention, awareness, and values, control is quietly transferred from consciousness to habit. Most people believe they are choosing, when in reality they are repeating. They wake up at the same time, check the same things, react in the same ways, consume the same distractions, and justify the same behaviors. Over time, these repetitions form grooves in the mind. And once a groove is deep enough, behavior flows through it effortlessly. At that point, choice becomes the exception rather than the rule. This is how life begins to feel predetermined, not because fate is fixed, but because behavior has become predictable. When the same inputs produce the same reactions, outcomes become inevitable. The illusion of freedom remains, but the experience of agency fades. The loss of control accelerates when awareness diminishes. Awareness is the capacity to observe thoughts, emotions, and impulses without immediately acting on them. It is the space between stimulus and response. When awareness is strong, control is possible. When awareness weakens, impulse takes over. Modern life relentlessly weakens awareness. Constant stimulation fragments attention, notifications interrupt thought. Endless content trains the mind to skim rather than reflect. Silence becomes uncomfortable because it exposes the inner noise that distraction suppresses. In this state, people do not lead their lives, they manage their discomfort. Discomfort is a critical factor in the erosion of control. The human nervous system naturally seeks relief. When discomfort arises, the mind looks for the fastest way to reduce it. Not the healthiest way, not the most meaningful way, the fastest way. This is why people reach for distraction, consumption, indulgence, and avoidance, even when they know these behaviors do not serve them. Over time, the mind associates discomfort with danger and relief with safety. Effort feels threatening. Stillness feels unbearable. Challenge feels oppressive. This conditioning makes discipline feel unnatural, even cruel, yet discipline is not cruelty. It is alignment with long-term well-being. The problem is not discipline itself, but a nervous system that has been trained to reject it. Another silent force that erodes control is emotional identification. Many people believe they are their emotions. When anger arises, they become anger. When fear arises, they become fear. When desire arises, they become desire. In this state, emotion does not inform behavior. It commands it. Emotions are signals, not orders. They provide information about internal states and external circumstances. But when they are obeyed without examination, they override values and intentions. A person who reacts emotionally feels justified in the moment and regretful afterward. This cycle repeats until identity becomes reactive. Emotional reactivity thrives in the absence of reflection. Reflection requires slowing down. It requires tolerating discomfort without immediately escaping it. This capacity has been severely weakened in many people. The result is a life driven by moods rather than meaning. The stories people tell themselves play a crucial role in maintaining this cycle. Internal narratives provide explanations that protect behavior from scrutiny. These narratives are often subtle and convincing. I'm stressed. I deserve this. I'll start tomorrow. This is just how life is. I'm Each story reduces friction between impulse and action. The mind prefers consistency over truth. Once it adopts a narrative, it seeks evidence to support it. This creates confirmation loops. A person who believes they lack discipline will notice every failure and ignore every act of restraint. Over time, belief solidifies into identity. Identity then governs behavior. Control is not just about actions. It is about beliefs. What you believe about yourself determines what you attempt, what you tolerate, and what you abandon. A person who believes they are powerless will not act powerfully. A person who believes change is unlikely will not persist long enough to create it. Environment compounds these effects. Behavior does not exist in isolation. It is shaped by surroundings, social norms, and exposure. A person surrounded by distraction will struggle to cultivate focus. A person surrounded by indulgence will struggle to practice restraint. A person surrounded by cynicism will struggle to sustain hope. Most attempts at self-improvement fail because environment is ignored. People try to change behavior while remaining in the same conditions that produced it. This is like trying to stay dry while standing in the rain. Control requires environmental awareness. What you see, hear, and engage with daily matters more than what you intend occasionally. Fatigue is another underestimated enemy of control. A tired mind has less capacity to resist impulse. A depleted body weakens executive function. Sleep deprivation, poor nutrition, and chronic stress reduce the brain's ability to regulate behavior. In this state, people blame themselves for failures that are physiological as much as psychological. Control is not a moral trait. It is a systemic outcome. It emerges when mind, body, environment, and beliefs are aligned. When these systems are neglected, control collapses regardless of intention. Delayed consequences play a central role in this collapse. The mind struggles to emotionally register future outcomes. Immediate pleasure feels real and vivid. Long-term cost feels distant and abstract. This asymmetry biases decision-making. People repeatedly choose what feels good now, even when they intellectually understand it will harm them later. This is why warnings rarely change behavior. Knowledge alone is insufficient. Control requires emotional alignment with future consequences. Those who regain control learn to make the future feel present. They regularly reflect on outcomes, not to induce fear, but to anchor responsibility. The daily battle is not between strength and weakness. It is between awareness and drift. Drift feels natural. It requires no effort. It allows habits, emotions, and environments to decide for you. Awareness feels effortful because it interrupts automaticity. But awareness is the gateway to agency. When awareness increases, control follows. Not instantly, not perfectly, but gradually. A person begins to notice impulses before acting on them. They notice narratives as they arise. They notice environmental triggers. This noticing creates space. In that space, choice becomes possible again. Small changes matter immensely. The mind responds to repetition, not intensity. A small act of restraint, repeated daily, reshapes identity more powerfully than a dramatic burst of effort followed by collapse. Consistency is the language of transformation. Those who reclaim control do not seek to eliminate desire, emotion, or comfort. They seek to reorganize authority. They decide which parts of themselves lead and which follow. They understand that freedom is not the absence of limits, but the presence of self-governance. The paradox is that discipline expands freedom. When impulses are regulated, options increase, energy returns, confidence stabilizes. Life becomes less chaotic, not because challenges disappear, but because responses become intentional. Control is not about rigidity. It is about responsiveness guided by values rather than reactivity driven by emotion. It is the difference between being pushed through life and walking through it deliberately. The erosion of control is reversible, but it requires honesty. It requires confronting uncomfortable patterns without excuses. It requires patience, because habits do not dissolve instantly. They weaken through neglect and replacement. The daily battle is won in ordinary moments, when you pause instead of react, when you choose effort over escape, when you tolerate discomfort without numbing it. These moments may feel insignificant, but they accumulate. And accumulation is how control is rebuilt. If you recognize yourself in these patterns, do not despair. Recognition is the first sign of awakening. Many people live their entire lives without noticing who is truly in control. Awareness means the battle has already shifted. If you want to continue learning how to dismantle these patterns and build a life directed by intention rather than impulse, subscribe to the channel now. What comes next will show you not only how control is lost, but how it is decisively reclaimed. Control is not maintained by force, it is sustained by structure. This is one of the most misunderstood truths about personal authority. Most people believe that those who are disciplined simply possess stronger willpower. They imagine an internal strength that others lack. This belief is comforting because it explains failure without requiring change. But it is false. Control does not come from extraordinary will, it comes from ordinary systems applied consistently. Willpower is fragile, it fluctuates with sleep, stress, emotion, hunger, and environment. Anyone who builds their life on willpower alone eventually collapses under its limits. Those who remain consistent do so not because they resist temptation endlessly, but because they reduce the number of times resistance is required. The hidden difference between those who feel in control of their lives and those who feel trapped is not motivation. It is structure. Structure determines what is easy, what is difficult, what is automatic, and what requires effort. When structure is aligned with values, control becomes sustainable. When structure is absent or misaligned, impulse fills the vacuum. Structure begins with clarity. A person who lacks clarity cannot sustain control because they do not know what they are protecting. Vague goals produce weak boundaries. If you do not clearly define what matters, everything competes for your attention, and when everything competes, impulse wins. Clarity is not about grand visions. It is about knowing what deserves consistency. What behaviors strengthen you? What behaviors weaken you? What environments support your best self? What environments erode it? This clarity must be practical, not abstract. It must translate into daily decisions. Many people sabotage themselves by confusing inspiration with clarity. Inspiration is emotional and temporary. Clarity is cognitive and stable. Inspiration may push you to act once. Clarity guides you when inspiration disappears. Control depends on the latter. Once clarity exists, structure can be built. Structure is simply the arrangement of your life in a way that favors alignment over impulse. It includes routines, boundaries, schedules, and environments. These are not restrictions. They are protections. Consider routines. A routine is not a prison. It is a decision made once, repeated daily. It removes the burden of choice from moments of weakness. When a behavior is embedded in a routine, it no longer requires negotiation. It becomes identity. People who lack routines must decide everything repeatedly: when to wake up, when to work, when to rest, when to consume. This constant decision-making depletes mental energy. As fatigue accumulates, impulse takes over. Control is lost not because of desire, but because of exhaustion. Boundaries are another critical element of structure. Boundaries define what you will not do, not just what you will do. Many people set goals, but avoid boundaries. They say yes to everything and wonder why they feel scattered. Boundaries protect attention, energy, and integrity. A boundary is an act of self-respect. It is a declaration that your time and focus have value. Without boundaries, external demands shape your life. With boundaries, you regain authorship. Structure also includes environment design. You do not live in a neutral space. Every object, sound, and visual cue influences behavior. A cluttered environment creates cognitive noise. A stimulating environment creates restlessness. An indulgent environment weakens restraint. Those who maintain control engineer their surroundings deliberately. They remove cues that trigger destructive habits. They place cues that reinforce constructive ones. They understand that behavior is often a response to what is nearby, not what is intended. This is not weakness, it is intelligence. Expecting yourself to resist constant temptation while surrounded by triggers is not strength, it is negligence. Control is preserved by reducing unnecessary battles. Time structure is equally important. An unstructured day invites drift. When time is undefined, it is filled by whatever is most immediately rewarding. This is why boredom often leads to distraction. Not because boredom is unbearable, but because there is no alternative structure to guide attention. A structured day does not eliminate freedom, it creates it. When essential tasks are scheduled, mental space opens, anxiety decreases because uncertainty is reduced, control increases because priorities are protected. Another pillar of sustainable control is identity alignment. People struggle to maintain habits that conflict with how they see themselves. If discipline feels like a costume rather than a reflection, it will not last. Identity must evolve alongside behavior. Identity is shaped by evidence. Every action casts a vote for the type of person you believe yourself to be. When actions are inconsistent, identity remains unstable. When actions align with values repeatedly, identity solidifies. This is why small, consistent actions matter more than dramatic changes. A single act of restraint does not change identity. Repeated acts do. Over time, discipline stops feeling like resistance and starts feeling like expression. Control strengthens when actions are framed as identity affirmations rather than sacrifices. Not, "I can't do this," but "this is not who I am." This subtle shift reduces internal conflict. You are no longer fighting yourself. You are expressing yourself. Emotional regulation plays a vital role in sustaining control. Structure does not eliminate emotion. It contains it. When emotions are anticipated and planned for, they lose their power to hijack behavior. For example, stress is inevitable. Without structure, stress leads to indulgence or avoidance. With structure, stress is met with predefined responses. Movement, rest, reflection, or healthy expression. Control is preserved not by avoiding emotion, but by channeling it. Another overlooked aspect of control is recovery. Many people believe discipline means constant effort. This belief leads to burnout. Sustainable control requires cycles of effort and recovery. Rest is not indulgence. It is maintenance. Without recovery, discipline becomes brittle. Small disruptions cause collapse. With recovery, discipline becomes resilient. Control endures because the system replenishes itself. Reflection is also essential. Without reflection, structure becomes mechanical. Reflection allows adjustment. It reveals what works and what does not. It prevents stagnation. A person who reflects regularly remains conscious. A person who does not reflect drifts. Reflection does not require complexity. It requires honesty. What strengthened me today? What weakened me? What patterns am I noticing? These questions, asked consistently, keep awareness alive. The greatest threat to structure is self-deception. People often build structures that look disciplined, but serve ego rather than growth. Overscheduling, perfectionism, and rigidity can become avoidance disguised as control. True control remains flexible. It adapts without abandoning values. This balance between structure and adaptability is critical. Structure without flexibility becomes oppression. Flexibility without structure becomes chaos. Control lives in the middle. Another enemy of sustained control is comparison. When people measure themselves against others, they lose contact with their own values. They adopt goals that do not resonate. Structure built on borrowed values collapses quickly. Control strengthens when goals are intrinsic. When discipline serves a purpose that matters deeply, effort feels meaningful rather than draining. This is why superficial goals rarely sustain change. Social environment also influences control. People absorb norms unconsciously. A person surrounded by impulsive behavior will find restraint harder. A person surrounded by intentional behavior will find discipline reinforced. This does not require isolation, but awareness. Those who maintain control choose their influences carefully, not because they feel superior, but because they understand susceptibility. Influence is inevitable. Selection is a form of self-governance. Control is also sustained by patience. Many people abandon structure because results are not immediate. They mistake delay for failure. But deep change unfolds slowly. The mind needs time to adapt. Identity needs time to reorganize. Those who persist understand that early stages feel artificial. Discipline feels forced before it feels natural. This is not a sign of failure. It is a sign of transition. The daily battle is not won by intensity, it is won by consistency. A controlled life is not dramatic, it is stable. It is not exciting every day, but it is fulfilling over time. When structure is in place, temptation does not disappear, but it loses authority. Impulse still speaks, but it is no longer obeyed automatically. Control is not silence. It is hierarchy. At the highest level, control becomes self-trust. You trust yourself to act in alignment even when it is inconvenient. This trust reduces anxiety because you are no longer negotiating with yourself constantly. Decisions become simpler. Life becomes quieter internally. This is the reward of sustained control, not domination, but peace, not suppression, but coherence. The parts of you work together rather than against each other. If you feel overwhelmed by the idea of structure, remember this. Structure is built incrementally. One routine, one boundary, one adjustment. Control is not seized, it is assembled. The daily battle continues, but it changes. It becomes less about resisting chaos and more about maintaining order. Less about fighting yourself and more about leading yourself. If you want to continue learning how this internal leadership is solidified and how control becomes an unshakable foundation rather than a constant struggle, subscribe to the channel now. What comes next will take you even deeper into the mechanics of lasting self-mastery and show you how control ultimately transforms not just behavior, but destiny. True control is ultimately revealed not in moments of calm, but in moments of pressure. Anyone can feel aligned, disciplined, and intentional when life is stable and predictable. The real test emerges when circumstances disrupt routine, when emotions intensify, when uncertainty enters, and when old patterns attempt to reassert themselves. This is where many people lose control again, not because they never learned discipline, but because they never learned how to sustain it under pressure. Pressure exposes hierarchy. It reveals which forces truly govern your life. When stress rises, the mind instinctively searches for familiar relief. Under pressure, the nervous system seeks speed, not wisdom. It looks for what has worked before to reduce discomfort, even if that relief was temporary or destructive. This is why people relapse into old habits during stressful periods, not because they forgot their values, but because stress narrowed their awareness. Stress compresses attention. It pulls focus toward immediate survival rather than long-term alignment. In this state, the brain prioritizes emotional regulation over meaning. Comfort becomes more attractive than coherence. Without preparation, pressure reactivates impulse and undermines structure. Sustained control requires pressure literacy. The ability to recognize stress as a predictable condition rather than an unexpected failure. Life will apply pressure. This is not a flaw in the system, it is the system. Control is not about eliminating pressure, but about preparing for it. Those who maintain control understand that discipline must be designed for difficult days, not ideal ones. Structures that only function when motivation is high are fragile. True structure anticipates resistance, fatigue, and emotional volatility. It does not collapse when circumstances shift. One of the most critical elements of pressure-resistant control is emotional containment. This does not mean suppression. It means the capacity to experience intense emotion without acting impulsively. Emotional containment creates internal stability, even when external conditions are unstable. Most people have never been taught how to stay present with discomfort. They have been taught how to escape it. As a result, discomfort feels intolerable. Under pressure, the urge to escape becomes overwhelming. Control is lost not because of desire, but because of intolerance. Learning to tolerate discomfort is one of the most powerful skills a person can develop. It expands the window of control. It allows you to pause when impulse demands action. It creates space between feeling and doing. This tolerance is built gradually, through small exposures, through choosing to sit with unease rather than immediately resolve it, through practicing restraint in low-stakes situations so it becomes available in high-stakes ones. Pressure also activates fear-based thinking. Fear narrows perception. It exaggerates threat and minimizes possibility. In this state, the mind becomes reactive, defensive, and short-sighted. Decisions are made to avoid pain rather than pursue meaning. Sustained control requires the ability to think clearly under emotional load. This clarity is not automatic, it is trained. Through reflection, rehearsal, and repetition, people who maintain control often mentally rehearse difficult scenarios. They imagine how they will respond under stress. This pre-commitment strengthens alignment. When pressure arrives, the mind defaults to the most rehearsed response. If impulse has been rehearsed for years, it will reappear. If restraint has been rehearsed consistently, it will emerge. Preparation determines response. Another critical aspect of control under pressure is expectation management. Many people lose control because they expect progress to be linear. When setbacks occur, they interpret them as failure rather than feedback. This interpretation triggers discouragement, which fuels abandonment. Setbacks are not evidence of incapacity. They are evidence of complexity. Change is not a straight path. It is iterative. Those who maintain control view setbacks as information, not identity. They adjust rather than collapse. Self-talk becomes especially important under pressure. The internal dialogue that emerges during difficulty determines whether control is reinforced or weakened. Harsh self-criticism amplifies stress and reduces capacity. Rational accountability maintains stability. Control is strengthened by compassionate discipline, not indulgence, but understanding. The ability to say, "This is difficult, and I will still act in alignment," rather than, "This is difficult, so I am justified in abandoning my values." Pressure also tests boundaries. Under stress, people are more likely to overcommit, over-explain, and overextend. They say yes when they should say no. They sacrifice recovery for productivity. They confuse urgency with importance. Sustained control requires boundary integrity under pressure, the willingness to protect energy even when demands increase. This often feels counterintuitive. When pressure rises, the instinct is to push harder. But pushing without recovery leads to collapse. Recovery is not optional during pressure. It is essential. Rest, reflection, and regulation allow the nervous system to reset. Without recovery, control becomes brittle. A brittle system shatters under strain. Another overlooked element is meaning anchoring. Under pressure, people who lack a clear sense of purpose lose motivation quickly. Effort feels pointless. Discipline feels burdensome. Those who are anchored to meaning endure pressure with greater resilience. Meaning does not remove pain. It contextualizes it. It answers the question, why am I enduring this? Without an answer, endurance collapses. Sustained control also depends on flexibility. Rigid systems break under pressure. Adaptive systems bend and recover. Flexibility does not mean abandoning values. It means adjusting methods while preserving principles. For example, when routines are disrupted, a flexible person finds alternative ways to maintain alignment. A rigid person abandons the routine entirely. Control is preserved through adaptation. Social pressure is another major challenge. Under stress, people often seek validation or relief through others. They may conform, appease, or compromise values to reduce tension. This is especially common in environments where restraint is not normalized. Maintaining control in social contexts requires clarity and courage. The clarity to know what you stand for. The courage to tolerate discomfort without seeking immediate approval. This is difficult but essential. Control also requires the ability to endure uncertainty. Pressure often arises from unknown outcomes. The mind dislikes uncertainty and seeks closure. This leads to premature decisions driven by anxiety rather than wisdom. Learning to coexist with uncertainty strengthens control. It reduces impulsive action. It allows decisions to emerge from clarity rather than fear. One of the most dangerous moments for control is success. When things improve, vigilance often decreases. Structure loosens. Old habits resurface. This is why many people sabotage themselves after progress. Sustained control requires humility, the recognition that alignment must be maintained, not assumed. Discipline is not something you graduate from. It evolves, but it remains necessary. Control also deepens with self-trust. When you repeatedly act in alignment under pressure, confidence becomes grounded. You begin to trust your ability to navigate difficulty without self-betrayal. This trust reduces anxiety and strengthens resolve. The ultimate goal of control is not domination, but harmony. A state where thought, emotion, and action move in the same direction. Pressure does not disappear, but it no longer fragments you. The daily battle changes at this stage. It becomes less about resisting collapse and more about maintaining coherence, less about proving strength and more about honoring integrity. If you are still listening at this point, it means you are not merely interested in change. You are committed to understanding it. That commitment matters. If you want to continue learning how control transforms into inner authority and how this authority reshapes every area of life, subscribe to the channel now. The next part will reveal how this internal mastery ultimately determines destiny itself, not through force, but through alignment. The final stage of control is not about effort, resistance, or even discipline, as most people understand it. It is about identity consolidation. This is the moment when the daily battle that once felt exhausting becomes quieter, not because temptation disappears, but because authority is no longer contested. At this level, control is no longer something you do. It is something you are. Most people never reach this stage because they remain trapped in negotiation with themselves. Every decision feels like an argument. Every restraint feels like loss. Every effort feels temporary. Life becomes a cycle of motivation and collapse. Control, when achieved this way, is always fragile. Lasting control emerges only when behavior, values, and identity converge. Identity is the deepest layer of human behavior. It determines what feels natural, what feels forced, and what feels impossible. When discipline exists only at the level of action, it requires constant energy. When discipline exists at the level of identity, it requires almost none. This is why some people appear effortlessly disciplined, not because they experience fewer urges, but because their urges no longer hold authority. Their internal hierarchy is settled. There is no debate about who is in charge. Identity consolidation occurs through evidence. The mind believes what it repeatedly witnesses. Each aligned action becomes proof. Over time, the internal narrative shifts from "I am trying to be disciplined" to "I am someone who lives this way." This shift is subtle but transformative. Once identity changes, behavior follows automatically. Control becomes stable because it is no longer dependent on mood or circumstance. One of the most important elements of this stage is self-trust. Self-trust is built when you consistently keep promises to yourself, especially under pressure. Each time you act in alignment despite discomfort, trust deepens. Each time you betray yourself, trust weakens. Most anxiety is rooted in self-distrust. When you do not trust yourself to act in your own best interest, the mind remains vigilant and tense. When self-trust is strong, the mind relaxes. Control feels natural rather than forced. This is why shortcuts undermine control. Temporary hacks, extreme measures, and unsustainable routines may produce short-term results, but they damage self-trust. When collapse follows intensity, the mind learns that discipline is unreliable. Identity fractures instead of consolidating. True control grows slowly. It is boring to the ego and satisfying to the soul. It is built through consistency rather than spectacle. Another key component of identity-level control is value clarity. Values are not slogans. They are lived priorities. A value that does not shape behavior is merely a preference. Control strengthens when values are embodied, not declared. When values are clear, decisions simplify. You no longer ask, "What should I do?" You ask, "What aligns with who I am?" This reframing removes friction. Control becomes coherence. This stage also requires relinquishing the need for external validation. As long as approval governs behavior, control remains externalized. Identity-level control is internally referenced. Approval becomes optional rather than necessary. This does not mean isolation or indifference. It means that alignment matters more than applause. People who reach this stage are less reactive to praise and less destabilized by criticism. Their center of gravity is internal. Another hallmark of consolidated control is emotional sobriety. Emotions are fully experienced, but they no longer dictate behavior. Joy does not lead to excess. Pain does not lead to collapse. Anger does not lead to destruction. Emotion becomes information rather than instruction. This emotional sobriety allows for deep presence. Life is no longer rushed or numbed. Moments are experienced fully without needing to be escaped or amplified. This presence creates a quiet confidence that others often sense but cannot explain. Control at this level also changes how failure is perceived. Failure is no longer a threat to identity. It becomes data. Correction replaces condemnation. Learning replaces shame. This resilience allows control to persist through inevitable mistakes. Another crucial shift is responsibility ownership. At this stage, responsibility is not heavy. It is liberating. The person no longer blames circumstances, people, or past versions of themselves. They recognize their power without self-attack. This ownership restores dignity. Life no longer feels like something that happens to you. It feels like something you participate in consciously. The daily battle does not disappear entirely, but it transforms. It becomes quieter, shorter, and less dramatic. Impulse still appears, but it is quickly recognized and dismissed. The inner environment becomes ordered. This order produces peace, not stagnation. Growth continues, but it is directed. Effort remains, but it is purposeful. Challenges arise, but they are met with composure rather than chaos. At this stage, control expands beyond the self. It influences relationships, work, creativity, and leadership. Others feel safer around someone who is internally governed. Trust increases. Influence grows naturally. Control also deepens spiritual maturity. When inner conflict subsides, deeper questions emerge. Purpose, contribution, and legacy replace survival and self-regulation. Life becomes less about avoiding harm and more about expressing meaning. The final paradox is this: control leads to freedom, not confinement. When impulse no longer dictates behavior, choice expands. When identity is coherent, energy increases. When alignment is stable, life feels lighter. This is not perfection, it is integrity. It is not domination, it is harmony. The daily battle that once decided who controls your life eventually decides something greater. What kind of life you live, and what kind of person you become while living it. If you have followed this entire journey, you are no longer unaware of the battle. Awareness alone changes outcomes. But awareness must be matched with commitment. If you want to continue walking this path of clarity, alignment, and inner authority, subscribe to the channel now. This is not content for momentary motivation. It is guidance for those who are ready to live deliberately. The battle continues, but now you know where it is fought, how it is won, and why it matters.